When I opened my purse, I froze at the sight of a strange device inside. Sensing something was terribly wrong, I took it straight to the nearest police precinct. After examining it, an officer walked over to me, his face twisted with panic and fear, and said, "Danger, ma'am. This isn't just some random gadget." I stood there in shock, unable to believe the explanation the officer gave me. But before we start the story, please write in the comments what part of the world you are watching this from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so this channel can keep growing and bring you even more fascinating stories. The atmosphere in the bedroom was quiet and peaceful. The only sound was the soft hum of the central air conditioning wrapping around the night. The hands of the clock on the wall moved with a steady rhythm, marking exactly 3 a.m. Zinnia was still deep in a calm, heavy sleep. Her dreams felt distant and fuzzy. However, that calm was shattered when the landline on the nightstand rang with a piercing shrillness. The ring tore through the silence of the night like a long scream, forcing her consciousness to claw its way back to the surface. Zinnia woke with a start, her heart hammering a mile a minute. She blinked, trying to gather the pieces of her soul still scattered in the dream world. Her hand fumbled in the darkness for the receiver. Who would be calling at such an ungodly hour? She thought with apprehension. Calls this late never brought good news. With a trembling hand, she lifted the receiver and brought it to her ear. Her voice sounded raspy as she greeted the person on the other end of the line. It was a man's voice, gripped by panic and haste. He said he was a neighbor of her mother, Eula, from down in the country. Without beating around the bush, he delivered the news that made Zinnia's blood run cold in her veins. He told her that her mother, Eula, had suddenly lost consciousness and was in critical condition. Zinnia's breath hitched. The image of her mother's face, elderly now and living alone back home, flooded her mind instantly. Tears welled up in her eyes. The fear of losing the person she loved most tightened her throat until she couldn't breathe. The man on the phone urged her to come immediately, as her mother's condition was worsening by the second. Zinnia dropped the receiver, which fell back into place with a dry thud. She turned to the other side of the king-sized bed and shook the body of her husband, Theron, who was sleeping with his back to her. "Theron!" She screamed his name in desperation. Theron stretched slowly and opened his eyes with a look that was slightly annoyed, yet serene. Zinnia, between sobs and with a broken voice, explained that her mother was dying and she had to go back home right now. She expected Theron to jump out of bed, get ready, and grab the car keys to drive her, like any supportive husband would. However, Theron's reaction was completely unexpected. The man sat up on the edge of the bed, rubbing his face slowly. Then he looked at Zinnia with an indecipherable expression. He didn't seem alarmed at all. Theron grabbed her shoulders and tried to calm her down with a voice that was soft but firm. He said he would love to go with her, but today was a crucial day for his career. He reminded her of the important meeting with the board of directors taking place that very afternoon. That meeting would determine the future of the company and Theron's position in it. If he didn't show up, years of effort would go down the drain, and they could lose everything. Zinnia fell silent, hearing her husband's explanation. A pang of disappointment shot through her heart. In such a critical moment, she desperately needed support, but she also knew how hard Theron worked to maintain their comfortable lifestyle. Zinnia was an accommodating wife and always tried to understand her husband's position. Reluctantly, she swallowed her pride. She said she understood and would go alone. Theron nodded, saying it was the best option. He asked her to get ready quickly while he warmed up the car and packed everything she needed for the trip so she wouldn't have to worry about a thing. Zinnia rushed to the bathroom to wash her face, which was swollen from crying. The cold water on her skin helped her think a little more clearly. Although anxiety for her mother's condition dominated her feelings, she dressed in comfortable clothes and wrapped her hair quickly but neatly. There was no time to look in the mirror. Her mind was already flying toward her mother's house in the country, hundreds of miles away from the city where she lived. She prayed internally, begging God to protect her mother until she arrived. Meanwhile, downstairs, Theron seemed busy between the kitchen and the garage. He grabbed one of Zinnia's travel bags and started packing various things. He put in a bottle of mineral water, some sandwiches, and a pack of tissues. His movements were calm and methodical, not like those of someone whose wife was suffering a tragedy. After packing the food, Theron took a small box from a hidden drawer in his study. He looked at the box for a moment with an icy expression and then slid it deep into Zinnia's bag. At the bottom, hidden under the folds of a spare jacket, he zipped the bag tight and carried it to the car. Zinnia came down the stairs in a hurry. She saw Theron standing by the car, the engine already purring softly. Theron opened the door for Zinnia and placed the bag he had prepared on the passenger seat. He looked at her with an expression that seemed full of concern. He asked her to be careful on the road, not to speed, and to let him know as soon as she arrived. Zinnia nodded. Tears welled up again. She felt guilty for having to leave her husband alone to take care of the house, but her worry for her mother was much greater. Zinnia gave Theron a kiss, asking for a blessing so her trip would go well. Theron kissed her forehead, a kiss that seemed normal, but for Zinnia, it was a source of strength. Zinnia got into the car and buckled her seatbelt. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the beating of her heart, which was still racing. Theron closed the car door and signaled for her to go. The car backed out slowly to leave their luxurious suburban driveway. When the car started to pull away from the yard, Zinnia looked in the rearview mirror. She saw Theron's figure standing on the dimly lit porch. Her husband didn't go straight back inside. He stood tall, watching as Zinnia's car drove off. From the distance, the silhouette of Theron's face was blurry. Zinnia couldn't clearly see her husband's expression, but something gave her a bad vibe. Theron pulled his cell phone out of his pocket and started typing something instead of waving goodbye as usual. Zinnia brushed off that strange sensation. She thought maybe Theron was contacting a colleague to prepare for the meeting. She had to focus on driving. The trip to her mother's town would take about 4 or 5 hours if traffic was light. At this hour, the interstate would be deserted, and she could go faster. The image of her mother's face filled her thoughts again. She hoped it wouldn't be the last time she could see her smile. With firm determination, Zinnia stepped on the gas. She launched the car through the darkness of the early morning, leaving behind her home and her husband, who slowly disappeared around a curve. Unknown to Zinnia, on the porch of the house, now silent again, Theron cracked a slight smile after sending a text message. He didn't go back inside to sleep or prepare materials for the meeting. Instead, he walked calmly to the kitchen. He brewed himself a cup of coffee and sat on the living room sofa with an expression of deep satisfaction, as if a great weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The plan he had meticulously hatched was already in motion. For him, Zinnia's departure that night wasn't a simple trip to visit a sick relative, but the beginning of an end he had been waiting for a long time. The highway stretching out before Zinnia looked like an endless black tunnel. The yellowish lights of the street lamps passed one after another overhead, creating a hypnotic rhythm of light and shadow. Being the dead of night, traffic was very scarce. There were only 1 or 2 18-wheelers moving slowly in the right lane, hauling freight between cities. Otherwise, the road was just for Zinnia. The silence in the car cabin was only broken by the sound of tires humming on asphalt and the soft gospel music Zinnia had playing on the car's audio system at low volume. She needed that calm to keep her composure. Zinnia was driving at a considerable speed. The speedometer needle held steady above the average limit. She wanted to get there as soon as possible. Every second that passed was torture for her, imagining her mother fighting death alone. However, amidst her anxiety, Zinnia started to notice something strange about her vehicle. At first, she thought it was just her imagination due to fatigue and sleepiness, but the sensation became increasingly real. The car, which normally glided smoothly, now felt a bit heavier. A fine vibration traveled up from the bottom of the car to the steering wheel she was gripping. It wasn't a normal vibration. It was different from what you feel when hitting a bump. It sounded like a low, constant hum, as if something was attached to the engine or the chassis of the car and affecting its aerodynamics. Zinnia tried to ignore it. She thought maybe the car just needed a routine checkup that Theron might have overlooked due to his busy schedule. She tried to stay focused on the road. An hour passed and Zinnia was already far from the city. The darkness on both sides of the highway was getting denser, dominated by woods and fields that couldn't be seen. Suddenly, the gas indicator on the dashboard blinked orange. Zinnia frowned. She remembered that the day before yesterday Theron had told her he had filled the tank. Did the car consume that much, or had Theron forgotten to fill it up? Zinnia slowed down. She couldn't risk running out of gas in the middle of a deserted highway like this. She saw a sign indicating a rest area with a gas station about 3 miles ahead. Zinnia decided to stop for a moment. Besides getting gas, she wanted to use the restroom and wash her face to wake up. She put on her left blinker and slowed down as the car veered into the rest area. The place looked deserted. There were only a few trucks parked with drivers sleeping inside and a sedan parked in a far corner. The neon lights of the gas station buzzed softly, surrounded by moths. The attendant looked drowsy, sitting on a bench near the pumps. After parking the car next to a pump and asking the attendant to fill it up, Zinnia leaned back in the seat. Her body felt sore. She grabbed the bag Theron had packed for her to get her wallet. As she reached into the bag, she felt a bunch of things packed quite tight. There was a water bottle, the sandwiches, and a jacket. Zinnia dug deeper to find her wallet, which she usually kept in an inner pocket of the bag, but instead of the soft leather of her wallet, her fingertips touched a cold, hard, metallic surface. Zinnia frowned. She didn't remember having anything like that in her purse. With curiosity, she moved the jacket covering the bottom of the bag aside. Hidden there was a black metal box about the size of a small brick. The object looked strange to her. It had no brand, no inscriptions, just a sturdy black box with some thin wires visible at the joints. What made Zinnia's heart suddenly race was a small indicator light on one side of the box, blinking with a faint red light. Slowly, Zinnia took the box out of the bag. It was quite heavy. She turned it over under the dome light of the car. "This ain't no power bank," she thought. Its shape was too rough to be a common electronic accessory. It wasn't an internet modem either. A feeling of unease began to creep up the back of her neck. Why had Theron put this in her bag? Was it one of Theron's work tools that had slipped in by mistake? But why was it in her travel bag? And why was that light blinking as if the device was active? Zinnia looked for a button to turn it off. She was afraid the object would drain the battery or damage other things in her bag. She found a small switch on the side. Without thinking twice, Zinnia pressed it. However, instead of turning off, the indicator light, which was previously blinking slowly in red, suddenly changed to yellow and began to blink at a faster rhythm. A soft, rhythmic beep was heard. Beep, beep. The sound was like a countdown on a digital clock. A glacial chill ran from her fingertips through her entire body. Her instinct was screaming that something was wrong, very wrong. She remembered the action movies she had watched with Theron about trackers or even something more dangerous. But this was the real world, and she was just an ordinary housewife. It was impossible for there to be an object like this in her bag. She tried to dismiss those bad thoughts, but the tremor of fear wouldn't go away. She looked at the gas station attendant who was closing her fuel cap outside the window. The outside world seemed normal, but inside this car, Zinnia felt she was holding a deadly mystery. Zinnia placed the object back on the passenger seat very carefully, as if it were made of thin, fragile glass. She grabbed her wallet with a hand shaking violently, paid the attendant for the gas without saying much, and quickly rolled up the window. She didn't go to the bathroom anymore. Her urge to urinate disappeared suddenly, replaced by a baseless but very intense terror. She looked at the black object now blinking in yellow. Her mind was a whirlwind. Should she call Theron and ask him? But a little voice inside her forbade it. The image of Theron's face on the porch, that indecipherable smile, and his decision not to go with her to see her mother. All the puzzle pieces spun in Zinnia's head. If Theron had put this object in, and it looked dangerous, then calling Theron might not be a good idea. Zinnia took a deep breath, trying to control herself. She couldn't panic. She had to find out what this object really was. Zinnia started the engine, but she didn't head back toward the highway entrance. Her instinct told her that continuing the trip with that strange object was suicide. She remembered that about 3 miles before the highway entrance, she had seen a sign indicating the nearest sheriff's precinct. Maybe that was the safest place for now. She would ask the police for help to examine the object. If it turned out to be just a harmless work tool of Theron's, she would apologize and continue her trip. But if it was something else, Zinnia didn't dare to keep thinking. With hands soaked in cold sweat, Zinnia turned the steering wheel, taking the car out of the rest area via a back exit, moving away from the highway toward a dark, lonely back road. The object on the seat next to her kept emitting its beep, 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 like a travel companion carrying a message of death. Zinnia sped through the night, no longer to save time for her mother, but to save her own life from a terrifying uncertainty. Zinnia turned the car and pulled into the precinct parking lot, which looked deserted but was well lit by floodlights. The building wasn't very big, with weathered paint and the U.S. flag waving slowly on the pole at the entrance. There was only one patrol car parked and several officers' motorcycles. Zinnia parked her car a bit far from the main entrance, driven by an instinct telling her to keep the vehicle away from the building. After turning off the engine, silence reigned again, only interrupted by the rhythmic beeping of the black box on the seat next to her, which now sounded increasingly threatening. With hands still trembling, Zinnia picked up the black box. She carried it carefully, as if carrying her own life in the palm of her hand. She got out of the car and ran toward the front desk. The cold night air chilled her bones and made strands of her hair flutter, but a cold sweat soaked her back. Inside the station, a young officer dozing in a chair behind the reception counter straightened up immediately upon seeing a woman arrive with a pale face and shallow breathing at such a lonely hour. Zinnia placed the black box on the officer's wooden counter with a stiff movement. The young officer frowned, looking at the strange object whose indicator light was blinking rapidly in yellow. Zinnia tried to speak, but her voice got stuck in her throat. She could only point at the object while stammering that she had found it in her bag and thought it was dangerous. The officer seemed confused at first and was about to touch the box. Maybe he thought it was just a normal electronic gadget that was broken or lost. But before his fingers touched the metal surface of the box, a firm, authoritative voice stopped him from behind. A middle-aged man in full uniform with a detective's badge on his belt stepped out of an inner office. It was Detective Vance, the head of the precinct, who happened to be working overtime, reviewing some files. His sharp eyes immediately fixed on the black box on the counter. His face, previously serene, tensed up in a matter of seconds. He immediately ordered the young officer to back up and step away from the counter. Detective Vance approached slowly, observing the blinking pattern of the light and the thin wires visible in the cracks of the box. Without touching it, the atmosphere in the room changed drastically, becoming oppressive. Detective Vance looked at Zinnia seriously and asked her where she had gotten that object. Zinnia explained with a trembling voice that she had found it in her bag during a trip out of town. Vance nodded slowly and grabbed his radio. He spoke in police codes that Zinnia didn't understand, but the tone of his voice was of extreme urgency. He requested the nearest EOD unit, Explosive Ordnance Disposal, to report to the location immediately. Upon hearing the word explosive, Zinnia's knees buckled. She had to grab the edge of the counter to keep from collapsing. Detective Vance led Zinnia to a long bench away from the reception counter, but still within a secure zone. He asked all officers present to clear the entrance area and lock the station doors temporarily. He explained to Zinnia, in a tone trying to be as calm as possible so she wouldn't panic, that the object she had brought wasn't the bomb itself, but a very sophisticated detonator or remote trigger. These types of devices were usually assembled by professionals, not amateurs. The veteran cop continued his explanation, which made Zinnia's blood freeze. He pointed to the blinking indicator light. According to his observations, the device was equipped with a speed sensor and an accelerometer. Its mechanism was designed to fully activate if the object moved at high speed consistently, like in a car on the interstate. The yellow light indicated that the device was in standby mode, waiting for the main detonator to trigger. If Zinnia had kept driving over 75 miles per hour for a few more minutes without stopping, the device would have sent the activation signal. Zinnia covered her mouth with her hand, stifling a gasp. She imagined herself alone on the dark highway. If she hadn't stopped for gas, or if she hadn't felt the curiosity to open her purse, she might have kept driving at full speed to get there in time to see her mother. Detective Vance's explanation made her realize she had just escaped death by a very narrow margin. The bad feeling she had had the whole way was actually a real warning from God, who was still protecting her. Shortly after, the atmosphere in the precinct became even more hectic. A black tactical van from the bomb squad arrived at the scene with sirens off to avoid drawing neighbors' attention. Several officers in full protective suits and thick helmets got out, carrying special equipment. They quickly secured the black box inside a blast containment vessel. Detective Vance spoke seriously with the head of the bomb squad team, pointing at Zinnia's car parked in the lot. Zinnia watched them argue with tense faces. Every now and then, they looked at her with an expression of concern. Detective Vance walked back over to Zinnia, who was still sitting, paralyzed and pale-faced. He crouched down in front of her so their eyes were on the same level, trying to convey a sense of safety. He asked her gently, "Who else had access to your bag and your car before you left?" With tears starting to fall again, Zinnia pronounced the name of Theron, her husband. She told him how Theron had packed the bag, put in the food, and warmed up the car. She also told him the reason Theron hadn't gone with her: an important meeting. Hearing the story, Detective Vance's jaw tightened. It seemed he could already fit the pieces of the evil puzzle together. However, he needed stronger physical evidence to confirm it. And that evidence, he was sure, was in Zinnia's car. The bomb squad team began approaching Zinnia's car with great caution. They used inspection mirrors with long handles to look under the car and metal and chemical detectors. Zinnia watched the process from behind the station window, accompanied by a female officer who gave her a cup of hot water. Zinnia's heart beat wildly, as if it wanted to burst out of her chest. She hoped they wouldn't find anything. She hoped it was all a big misunderstanding or a very bad joke. But that hope vanished when one of the bomb squad officers signaled his partner with his hand and pointed to a spot under the driver's seat. A small flicker of panic was seen among the bomb disposal team, but they quickly controlled it with great professionalism. They brought out a small robot on tracks to retrieve the suspicious object without direct human contact. Minutes passed that felt like hours of torture. Finally, the officers managed to detach a package that was firmly stuck to the car chassis. The package was moved away and secured in an open area that had been prepared with sandbags. Detective Vance came back into the room where Zinnia was waiting. His face looked much grimmer than before. He sat next to Zinnia and sighed deeply before speaking. With a grave voice, he communicated a fact that shattered Zinnia's soul. The bomb squad team had found 4 pounds of C4 plastic explosive. The explosive was placed very professionally and precisely right under Zinnia's seat. The bomb was connected to a wireless receiver system whose frequency matched the detonator that was in Zinnia's bag. Zinnia felt her world collapse. She could no longer hold back the crying. Her body shook violently. The image of her body blown to pieces on the highway spun in her head. She couldn't believe the car she usually used to take kids to Sunday school or go grocery shopping had been turned into a rolling coffin by someone's hand. And that person was most likely her own husband, the man she had loved and respected for years. The pain of that betrayal was much more painful than the fear of death itself. Detective Vance let Zinnia cry for a moment to let it out. Then he asked again to verify something important. He asked about the reason Zinnia had left that night. Zinnia told him about the call informing her that her mother was seriously ill. Detective Vance, with his sharp detective instinct, immediately felt something didn't add up. He asked Zinnia to try calling her mother, Eula, right then using the station phone to confirm her real condition. Zinnia hesitated at first because it was still early morning, but she obeyed with trembling hands. She dialed her mother's home phone number down in the country. The ringtone sounded several times. Zinnia's heart beat hard, fearing no one would answer or she would receive more bad news. However, after the fourth ring, a hello was heard with the raspy voice typical of someone who just woke up. It was her mother's voice. She sounded healthy, calm, and a little confused. Zinnia broke down crying upon hearing her mother. Eula was surprised to hear her daughter crying and asked what was wrong. Zinnia asked, "Mama, are you sick?" Eula chuckled, saying she was perfectly healthy, that she had just gotten up for her morning devotionals and nothing was wrong. The phone fell from Zinnia's hands, dangling by the cord. She looked at Detective Vance with a vacant stare. Her mother was fine. The call that morning was a lie. The panicked voice of the neighbor was fake. It was all a setup to make Zinnia panic, forcing her to drive alone in the middle of the night, emotionally distraught and at full speed on the interstate, so the bomb would explode. Theron had planned it all with extreme detail and cruelty. He wanted Zinnia to die in an accident that looked tragic but plausible, so no one would suspect a thing. Detective Vance then took Zinnia to his office. He showed her his computer screen. The police cybercrimes unit, acting quickly, had already managed to obtain initial data on Theron's background. The screen showed terrifying financial data. Theron was drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt from an investment scam he had secretly participated in. All his business assets were mortgaged, and the most painful thing was a life insurance policy in Zinnia's name with fantastic coverage that had just been approved and activated 3 days ago. The main clause was full payout if the insured died in a traffic accident. Zinnia looked at the screen with glassy eyes. All the puzzle pieces now fit together to form a monstrous image. Theron's kindness lately, the packed bag, the warmed-up car, and the excuse of the important meeting. It was all part of a murder-for-money plan. Her husband didn't just want to kill her. He wanted to trade her life for cash to cover his own greed and failure. Zinnia felt nauseous. Her sincere love had been repaid with deadly poison. Amidst her shattered heart, Detective Vance stared at Zinnia. He said they couldn't let Theron get away with it. The law had to be applied, and Zinnia had to get justice, but to arrest Theron with irrefutable evidence, they needed Zinnia's cooperation. Detective Vance asked her if she was willing to do something risky, but something that would catch Theron in his own game. Zinnia wiped her tears brusquely. Her face, previously full of fear, slowly turned cold and hard. Her gaze, once soft, sharpened, reflecting strong determination. She looked at Detective Vance and nodded firmly. She was no longer a weak victim. She was ready to fight. The atmosphere in Detective Vance's office became even more oppressive, as if the oxygen in the room was slowly running out, replaced by a dense cloud called bitter reality. Zinnia sat stiffly in a chair across from the veteran cop's desk. Her hands clenched each other on her lap until her knuckles turned white. The tears had dried on her cheeks, leaving a sticky trail that made her skin feel tight. However, her eyes now reflected a different look. If before they were full of the fear and confusion of a terrified wife, now they were beginning to fill with a chilling void, a void created when trust is pulverized. Detective Vance placed an electronic tablet on the table, sliding it slowly toward Zinnia with a hesitant gesture. The middle-aged man seemed reluctant, as if he knew what he was going to show her was the final nail in Zinnia's coffin. He explained that the cybercrimes unit hadn't just found the debt and insurance data, they had also intercepted Theron's digital communications in the last few hours. The police needed to monitor Theron's activity to see if there were other accomplices involved in the murder plan, and from that interception, another fact no less repugnant had emerged. Zinnia looked down, steeling herself to look at the bright screen of the tablet. There, a screenshot of a text conversation between Theron's number and a contact named VIP Client was displayed. However, the content of the conversation had nothing to do with business. The language used was very intimate, full of pet names and heart emojis that churned Zinnia's stomach. The real name of the contact owner, according to police tracking, was Soraya. Zinnia knew that name. Soraya was one of Theron's co-workers, a career woman whose intelligence Theron often praised in front of Zinnia, a woman who had been to their house several times for work matters, and whom Zinnia had welcomed kindly, even cooking for her on occasion. Zinnia's index finger trembled as she scrolled through the screen, reading the exchanged messages one by one. The messages were sent right when Theron told Zinnia to leave for the country. Theron wrote a message saying, "The package has been sent," referring to Zinnia having already left. Soraya's reply made Zinnia's blood boil. The woman asked in a sugary tone, "When can we be free and enjoy the money from this big project?" Theron responded with the sweet promise that after the news of the tragedy broke the next morning, they would immediately book tickets for a vacation in Europe next month to celebrate their financial freedom and new status. It turned out the important board of directors meeting, which was the reason Theron couldn't go with Zinnia, was a complete lie. The conversation revealed that this afternoon, Theron and Soraya planned to have a romantic lunch at an exclusive downtown restaurant to celebrate the initial success of their plan. Theron wanted to build an alibi that he was busy working while his wife suffered a tragic accident out of town. The betrayal felt doubly painful for Zinnia. Theron didn't just want to kill her for money to pay his debts, but he also wanted to get rid of her for another woman. Zinnia felt she had been living in a theater where she was the only one who didn't know the script. Zinnia put the tablet back on the table slowly, as if the object had just burned her fingertips. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, a breath that hurt her lungs. The image of Theron's face, smiling sweetly while giving her grocery money, or telling her she looked beautiful, now transformed into the face of a terrifying monster. All the beautiful memories of their years of marriage seemed to be erased, replaced by deep disgust. She felt stupid. How naive she had been to fully trust that man, serving him and praying for him in every prayer, while he planned her death so coldly next to another woman. Detective Vance watched the change in Zinnia's expression carefully. As a cop who had been dealing with criminal cases for decades, he knew this moment was a turning point for a victim. It was the moment sadness turned into anger, and anger, if channeled correctly, was the most powerful weapon. Vance said in a low but firm voice that Zinnia had two options. The first option was that the police could arrest Theron immediately with evidence of attempted murder. Theron would go to jail, but the legal process would be long, and he could hire an expensive lawyer to reduce his sentence, claiming there had been no victims. The second option, Vance continued, was to play Theron's game. They would make him believe his plan had worked. They would create the illusion that Zinnia had really died. This way, Theron would feel invincible. He would let his guard down, and that's when he would make fatal mistakes that would become irrefutable evidence in court. The police wanted to catch Theron not just planning the crime, but while trying to enjoy the fruits of his crime, including the moment he tried to collect the insurance money. That would be the definitive proof of fraud and premeditated murder that would make him rot in jail for life. Zinnia opened her eyes. There were no tears in them anymore. Her gaze was now cold, as calm as the surface of a deep lake, but with a strong undercurrent. She remembered her mother's face back home, who almost lost her only daughter. She remembered how she almost died absurdly on a lonely highway. The pain in her heart hardened slowly until it became steel determination. She didn't want Theron to spend just a few years in jail and then walk free. She wanted Theron to experience total ruin. She wanted her husband to feel the fall from the highest place he had dreamed of. Zinnia stared at Detective Vance and nodded slowly. She chose the second option. She was willing to be the bait. Suddenly, Zinnia's cell phone on the table vibrated briefly. The screen lit up showing a notification of an incoming message from Theron. "My love." Zinnia's heart beat hard, a mix of hate and fear. Detective Vance signaled her not to touch the phone yet. He read the message from a distance without unlocking it. The message said, "Babe, honey, why haven't you let me know? Where are you? I'm worried. I have a bad feeling." A message that would seem very loving to a stranger. However, for Zinnia and Vance, who knew the truth, the message sounded terrifying. Theron was checking his target's position. Detective Vance thought for a moment, mapping out a strategy. He told Zinnia they shouldn't reply to the message. Leaving the message unread would make Theron increasingly anxious and curious. If Zinnia replied, Theron would know she was still alive and had the phone. Silence was the best weapon right now. They had to let Theron speculate. Had the bomb exploded? Was the signal lost? Uncertainty would begin to slowly devour Theron's calm. Zinnia obeyed the order, leaving the phone where it was. It disgusted her to see the name Theron, my love, on her phone screen. She wanted to vomit all her rage, curse Theron over the phone, but she held back with all her might. She realized that from this moment on, the old Zinnia, the submissive and sweet wife, had to die so the new Zinnia could survive. She had to be a better actress than her husband. She had to be strong, not for herself, but for justice and for her mother, who knew nothing back in the country. Detective Vance then called several of his officers. He began distributing tasks quickly and efficiently. One team would be in charge of taking Zinnia to a safe house, a secure location no one could track. Another team, composed of forensics and the bomb squad, would be in charge of taking Zinnia's car to a special scrapyard to blow it up in a controlled manner. They had to create a fake but convincing crime scene. The car had to be destroyed, as if it had exploded from an accident on the highway. The wreckage would become the proof of Zinnia's fake death. Zinnia listened to the plan attentively. She asked quietly if she could watch her car explode. Detective Vance hesitated at first, fearing it might cause her trauma, but seeing Zinnia's determined look, he finally agreed. Maybe for Zinnia, seeing the destroyed car would be a symbolic act of liberation, the symbol of the destruction of her fake marriage. Detective Vance ordered his officers to prepare a bulletproof vest for Zinnia as standard safety procedure. Then they prepared to move. The night marched on, but for Zinnia, it wasn't time to sleep. It was the beginning of a silent war, a war against the person who slept next to her every night. Leaving Detective Vance's office toward the police car that would take her, Zinnia looked at the night sky, dark and starless. She promised herself that Theron would pay dearly for every tear shed that night, and that she herself would make sure the tab was settled in full. A motorcade of police vehicles moved forward, breaking the silence of the night, toward a desolate, barren area on the outskirts of the city. A patrol car led the way without sirens. Only its rotating lights broke the darkness. In the middle, a special tow truck transported Zinnia's car, which still contained the bomb. And behind, Zinnia sat in a tactical vehicle next to Detective Vance and two armed officers. They were heading to an old, abandoned limestone quarry, a place the bomb squad team used for detonation practice or to destroy explosives found from old wars. It was far from any inhabited area, surrounded by high limestone cliffs that would muffle the sound and vibration of the explosion. During the ride, Zinnia remained silent, staring at the back of the seat in front of her. Her mind wandered. She remembered that car, a white sedan Theron had bought her 3 years ago as a wedding anniversary gift. Zinnia remembered how happy she felt at that moment. She remembered how Theron handed her the car keys with a big red bow, hugging her and whispering that he wanted her to be safe and comfortable when she traveled. How ironic. The car he gave her for safety reasons had now become the instrument to end her life. That gift was actually a Trojan horse harboring death. Every sweet memory of that car now tasted like painful poison. Upon arriving at the old quarry, the atmosphere was bleak and cold. The night wind blew hard, kicking up chalk dust. The officers quickly set up portable floodlights that illuminated the wide, flat central area of the quarry. Zinnia's car was lowered from the tow truck with extreme care and placed in the center of the cleared zone. The bomb squad team went back to work in their full protective suits. They weren't going to defuse the bomb, but detonate it remotely, but with a configuration that would make the explosion look like an accident from a collision and gas tank fire, not a terrorist attack. This was important, so the traffic accident scenario would be accepted by the public and the insurance company. Zinnia stood behind a safety line about 200 yards from the car, protected by a concrete observation wall. Detective Vance was by her side holding binoculars. Before the detonation, an officer asked Zinnia for permission to take some personal items out of the car that might need to be saved or, conversely, left as evidence. Zinnia handed over her purse, but asked the officer to leave one of her shoes and a scarf she usually kept in the car. Those objects would be found later, charred or damaged, to reinforce identification that the victim was indeed inside the car at the time of the event. The preparation process was long and tense. The officers placed several crash test dummies in the driver's seat to simulate the weight of a human body. They also sprayed some extra fuel around the car to ensure a dramatic fire effect after the explosion. The main goal was to char the vehicle until it was hard to recognize, to erase any trace of Theron's homemade bomb mechanism. Once everything was ready, all personnel retreated to the safe zone. The atmosphere became silent. Only the sound of the wind and the crackle of police radios could be heard. The bomb squad commander began the countdown over the loudspeaker. 5, 4, 3... Zinnia held her breath. Her hands gripped the railing in front of her. Her eyes didn't leave the small white car sitting alone in the middle of the barren field. The car looked so fragile and wretched under the blinding light of the floodlights. 2, 1... Detonation. A deafening explosion shattered the silence of the night. A gigantic fireball of reddish-orange rose toward the sky, illuminating the limestone cliff walls with a terrifying light. The ground Zinnia stood on vibrated violently. The shockwave of the explosion hit her face like a slap of hot air. Even though she was at a safe distance, the roar was so loud her ears rang. The white car disappeared instantly, engulfed by flames. It was thrown slightly into the air before falling back down as a mass of burning, twisted metal. Zinnia watched the roaring fire with eyes wide open, unblinking. The heat of the flames seemed to consume the last vestiges of her doubts. Seeing the chassis of her car begin to melt and blacken, Zinnia felt a part of her die there too. The naive Zinnia, the Zinnia who always yielded, the Zinnia blind to her husband's evil. All had been consumed by the fire along with the car. From the ashes of destruction, a new figure would emerge who wouldn't stop until justice was served. A tear rolled down her cheek, not of sadness, but of a strange relief. She was safe, she was still alive, and Theron didn't know. After the firefighters on standby began to control the fire, Detective Vance gave the signal to the police public relations team. According to the plan, they would soon release limited information to traffic radio networks and some trusted local crime reporters. The news would be broadcast as a solo accident at mile marker X. A car caught fire violently. The driver is presumed dead on the scene. This information was designed to reach Theron's ears through news channels or social media, not through a direct call from the police, so Theron's panic would seem natural. Just as the officers were spraying water on the smoking remains of the car, Zinnia's cell phone rang in Detective Vance's pocket. The detective looked at the screen. "Your husband is calling," he said dryly. It was a normal phone call, not a WhatsApp message. Theron might be starting to panic because his text hadn't been answered and his feeling was getting worse, or maybe he was trying to act like a worried husband. Vance showed Zinnia the flashing screen of the phone. The name Theron My Love appeared there with a profile picture of both of them smiling happily, a photo from the past that now looked like a sham. Zinnia shook her head, indicating not to answer. Vance let the phone ring once, twice, 3 times. The ring sounded shrill amidst the post-explosion silence. On the 4th ring, Detective Vance pressed the reject button and immediately turned off the phone and took out the SIM card. That action would have a dramatic effect on the other end. For Theron, a phone that rejects the call and then goes dead could be interpreted as a loss of signal or a phone destroyed by a fatal event. Zinnia's digital sign of life had been cut. From that moment on, for the outside world, Zinnia no longer existed. She was a ghost. Detective Vance put the powered-off phone in an evidence bag, looked at Zinnia and said, "Now we wait for his reaction. We'll take you to a safe house. You won't be able to contact anyone there, not even your mother back home, until we give the signal. It'll be hard, ma'am, but it's the only way." Zinnia nodded obediently. She looked one last time at the remains of her car, which were now just a skeleton of black, smoking metal. The smell of burnt rubber and metal permeated the air. She turned around and walked toward the police car without looking back. Her steps were firm and determined. That night she learned that the closest person can be the deadliest enemy, and to fight him, she had to become something her enemy would never expect, a woman who was no longer afraid because she had already died once. The atmosphere in the private booth of the restaurant, located on the top floor of a skyscraper, was quiet and exclusive. The aroma of expensive food, prepared by a renowned chef, mixed with the scent of fresh lilies adorning every table in one of the most strategic corners next to a large window, offering views of the city bustle from the heights. Theron was sitting across from Soraya. On their table was a fancy dessert and 2 glasses of imported fruit juice, whose colors sparkled under the crystal lamplight. To a distant observer, they looked like a pair of successful business partners, enjoying a relaxed lunch, or perhaps a well-matched couple. But the calm on Theron's face was just a thin mask he wore with difficulty. Behind the polite smile he gave the waiter pouring him mineral water, his heart was racing. Since that morning, he hadn't stopped looking at his cell phone, which he had placed face down on the table. The last message he sent to Zinnia never received a reply. His calls wouldn't connect either. That uncertainty had him restless. Had his plan worked? Had the bomb exploded according to his calculations? Or was there some technical glitch that saved Zinnia and now she was on her way home or reporting him to the police? Those bad thoughts spun in his head like an uncontrollable top. Soraya, a beautiful woman in an elegant blazer and perfectly styled hair, noticed the restlessness of the man in front of her. She touched Theron's hand gently, giving it a little squeeze intended to calm him, but which felt demanding, whispering so as not to be heard by other patrons. Soraya whispered, asking why he looked so tense. She reminded him they should be celebrating this day as the beginning of their new future. Soraya urged Theron to relax, because if he kept looking at his phone with a panicked face, people would start to suspect. Theron tried to smile, nodded slightly, and took a sip to moisten his dry throat. Suddenly, the attention of all the restaurant patrons shifted. The large TV screen on the wall, which normally only broadcast stock market news or travel promos without sound, now showed a striking red banner with the text "Breaking News" at the bottom. The restaurant manager turned up the TV volume because the news being broadcast was considered important and urgent. Theron turned stiffly toward the screen. His heart seemed to stop for an instant. On the screen, a news anchor with a serious face reported a fatal accident on Interstate 95 headed south. The camera then switched to amateur video footage from the scene. The image was shaky and blurry, but clear enough to show a white sedan engulfed in huge flames on the shoulder. Thick black smoke rose into the daytime sky. The news narrator mentioned that the car had exploded and burned violently, presumably after losing control and hitting the guardrail, causing a leak in the gas tank. It also mentioned that the driver, allegedly a woman, had died on the scene, unable to escape. In that instant, Theron knew he had to start his performance. It was the moment he had rehearsed in front of the mirror over and over. He dropped his glass on the floor on purpose. The loud sound of breaking glass made every eye in the restaurant focus on him. Theron stood up, his body trembling. His eyes were wide, fixed on the TV screen. He screamed hysterically, pronouncing Zinnia's name with a voice raw and full of despair. He pointed at the TV screen, acting as if he recognized the car's license plate, which was actually charred and couldn't be seen clearly. Soraya, who was also ready for her role, got up quickly and hugged Theron, pretending to calm him. Theron collapsed on the floor, crying and screaming like a husband who just lost half his soul. Several waiters and other customers surrounded them quickly with concerned faces. They offered help, water, and words of comfort. Theron played his role to perfection. He pounded the floor, raving about how much he regretted letting his wife go alone, about how much he loved her. Inside, Theron smiled maliciously. No one doubted his grief. His alibi was being built solidly in front of dozens of witnesses. After that brief drama, Theron, supported by Soraya, quickly left the restaurant. They headed at full speed to the county hospital nearest the accident site, where, according to the news, the victim's body had been taken. During the ride in his luxury car, Theron's crying ceased as soon as the door closed and the tinted windows isolated them from the outside world. He wiped his face with a wet wipe, erasing the trail of his crocodile tears. He turned to Soraya and asked in a cold tone if she had made sure all the insurance policy documents were safe and nothing was missing. Soraya nodded with a crooked smile, praising Theron's performance, which, according to her, deserved an award. Upon arriving at the hospital, the atmosphere in the morgue was cold and smelled of disinfectant. Several police officers, including Detective Vance in plain clothes, were already there. Theron put his face of deep grief back on. He walked stumbling toward the steel table, where an orange body bag lay stiffly. The coroner explained in a compassionate tone that the condition of the body was regrettable, charred to the point of being physically unrecognizable. However, they had found remains of personal items, a piece of fabric from a scarf, and a woman's shoe that had survived the fire. The officer showed the evidence already in a clear plastic bag. Theron looked at the partially melted shoe. He recognized it as Zinnia's shoe. He grabbed the bag with trembling hands, pressed it against his chest, and started crying inconsolably again. He screamed Zinnia's name, asking for forgiveness and promising he would always pray for her. Detective Vance watched every move Theron made from a corner of the room with a piercing gaze behind his sunglasses. He saw how Theron glanced occasionally at the hospital administrative staff as if impatient to get it over with. The height of Theron's vileness came when they asked him to sign a waiver for the autopsy and the form to release the body. Theron argued he didn't want his wife's body subjected to further indignities since she had suffered enough, and he wanted to bury her with dignity as soon as possible. But when the official handed him the pen, Theron whispered to the clerk with a tone of urgency he tried to disguise as panic. He asked when the official death certificate would be ready, as he needed it urgently for bank paperwork and to close the deceased's accounts, although what he was really looking for was the main requirement to claim the insurance. The clerk, who had also been briefed by the police, replied that the certificate would be ready the next morning. Theron nodded quickly. His eyes shone for an instant with a greed he couldn't hide. Then he went back to hugging Soraya, who was standing by his side like a supportive colleague. Behind that hug, Theron whispered a sentence of victory in Soraya's ear. "We did it. Those 2 million are ours." Soraya returned the hug tightly, imagining the designer bags and luxury vacations she would soon enjoy. They didn't realize that in the next room, through a one-way mirror, Zinnia was standing motionless, witnessing the whole scene. Her heart, previously full of love, was now completely frozen, ready to deliver a punishment to match. 3 days had passed since the fake funeral. A new mound of red dirt with a wooden marker bearing Zinnia's name was now in the municipal cemetery, but inside was just an empty casket filled with banana tree trunks for weight. A secret only the police and Zinnia herself knew. Theron was now sitting alone on the leather sofa in the living room of his spacious and luxurious house. The atmosphere of the house was different. Normally, at this hour, Zinnia would be busy in the kitchen making dinner or praying in her little prayer closet near the back garden. But now the house was silent, a silence that, instead of being relaxing, pressed on his eardrums. Theron sipped his black coffee, which was starting to get cold. On the table in front of him were scattered important documents: the insurance policy, the death certificate, the police report of the fake accident, and a list of assets he could liquidate soon. He felt on top of the world. The insurance company had already contacted him, and the claim process was moving smoothly. They just needed a final meeting for the symbolic handover and fund transfer, scheduled for the day after tomorrow. Theron smiled widely, imagining the zeros in his bank account, all his investment debts paid off, and the rest more than enough to live in luxury with Soraya. However, his feeling of victory began to be disturbed by small, strange details. Since returning from the funeral the previous afternoon, he felt watched. At first, he thought it was just the effect of exhaustion and a normal subconscious guilt. But the disturbances became increasingly real and physical. That afternoon, when he entered the master bedroom he shared with Zinnia, he perceived a very specific scent. It was the scent of cocoa butter and gardenias, the perfume Zinnia always used after showering. The smell was so strong and fresh, it seemed Zinnia had just walked past him seconds ago. Theron froze in the doorway. The hair on his arms stood up. He scanned the room with a blank stare. Windows shut tight, AC running normally. He tried to chase away his fear with logic. Maybe some of Zinnia's perfume spilled or lingered in the curtains. He walked quickly and threw the windows wide open to dissipate the smell. Then he sprayed lemon air freshener in excess. He didn't want a single trace of Zinnia left in that house, especially traces that could awaken unwanted memories. The night wore on, and the disturbances continued. While Theron was concentrated calculating the money split on his laptop, he suddenly heard a faint sound from the back of the house. The sound was soft, rhythmic, and very familiar. It was the sound of the gospel music Zinnia used to play on a small Bluetooth speaker while cooking or cleaning. Theron froze. His heart raced. He knew perfectly well he had turned off that speaker and put it in the storage room because he didn't like hearing it. With hesitant steps and a slight tremble, Theron walked toward the source of the sound. As he got closer to the back den, the sound became clearer. Sure enough, on the dining table, the small white speaker was on, playing those melodies at moderate volume. Theron looked at the object with horror. Who had turned it on? He was alone in the house. He had given the housekeeper the week off with the excuse that he wanted to be alone to grieve. With a mix of rage and fear, Theron grabbed the speaker and smashed it against the floor, shattering it. The music stopped instantly, replaced by Theron's ragged breathing in the room, silent again. "Who's there? Who's playing with me?" Theron shouted. His voice echoed off the empty walls. He ran to check the back door and windows. Everything was locked from the inside, no signs of forced entry. Cold sweat began to run down his temples. He went back to the living room, trying to calm down by turning on the TV at full volume. Maybe there was a short circuit in the speaker, and it turned on by itself, he thought, trying to be rational. Yes, surely it was a cheap, defective electronic device. Tired of the tension, Theron decided to turn in early. He went up to the second floor, entered his room, and went straight to his plush king-size bed. He wanted to close his eyes and wake up the next morning with the sun shining, hoping all these strange sensations would be gone. Theron pulled his expensive silk blanket and rested his head on the pillow. However, his head hit something hard under the pillowcase. He didn't feel the softness of goose feathers, but a solid, painful object. Theron groaned in annoyance, sat up, and felt under the pillow. His hand touched a cold metal box. When he pulled the object out and saw it under the dim light of the bedside lamp, his eyes almost popped out of his sockets. His face turned pale as paper. It was the detonator, the black bomb trigger with the indicator light he knew so well, the device that should have been destroyed in the explosion along with Zinnia's car on the interstate. The device he himself had assembled and hidden in the bag. Why was it here? How was it possible? If the detonator was here, what had exploded in the car? Theron turned the box over with trembling hands. On the bottom of the box was a bright yellow sticky note. On it, a message written in handwriting he knew very well. Zinnia's fine, neat handwriting. "Honey, you forgot to turn this off. What a waste of battery." Theron threw the box to the other end of the room as if he had just touched an ember from hell. He backed up until his back hit the wardrobe. He was gasping as if suffocating. This couldn't be a ghost. Ghosts can't move physical objects. Ghosts don't write messages on sticky notes. This was the work of a human being. Someone was playing with him. Someone knew his secret, and there was only one other person besides him who knew the details of the bomb plan and the detonator: Soraya. Theron's thoughts went immediately to his mistress. Soraya knew everything. Soraya was the most ambitious about the money. Surely it was Soraya who took the detonator before Zinnia left without Theron knowing. Maybe to blackmail him later, or maybe Soraya had conspired with someone to scare him into handing over all the insurance money. Suspicion and paranoia instantly torched Theron's sanity. With hands still shaking, Theron grabbed his cell phone and dialed Soraya's number. As soon as she answered, Theron didn't give her a chance to speak. He insulted her directly with a contained voice, but full of anger. "You think this is funny, Soraya? What did you put under my pillow? You want to play games with me, huh?" On the other end, Soraya sounded confused and just woken up. "What are you talking about, Theron? I'm in my apartment sleeping. You must be dreaming." "Don't lie," Theron bellowed. "The detonator is in my room right now with a note written by Zinnia. Only you knew about that device. You want to blackmail me, right? You want to keep all the money?" Soraya started getting angry at being accused without reason. "Are you crazy, Theron? How was I going to go to your house? I don't have the keys. And why would I keep evidence of our crime? You must be hallucinating from stress. Take a pill." Soraya hung up unilaterally. Theron threw the phone on the bed. He pulled his hair in frustration. If it wasn't Soraya, then who? Could Zinnia still be alive? Impossible. The news had confirmed it. The police had confirmed it. He had even seen the remains of Zinnia's burnt shoe. The body was charred. Then who? Theron looked around his luxurious room, which now looked like a prison. The shadows in the corners seemed to move threateningly. For the first time in his life, Theron felt very small and helpless against an invisible enemy. He didn't know that every corner of his house was now equipped with micro-surveillance cameras installed by Detective Vance's team. And in a safe house, far from there, Zinnia watched a monitor, observing her husband's fear with a cold, merciless gaze. That morning, the sun shone brightly in the sky, as if it didn't care about the darkness enveloping Theron's heart. The man stood in front of the large mirror in his bedroom, adjusting the dark blue silk tie he was wearing. He disguised the dark circles under his eyes with a little powder. The remnants of the previous night's terror he tried to bury deep under an expensive Italian suit wrapping his body. Today was the big day, the day to collect the insurance claim worth $2 million. Theron convinced himself that the events of the previous night, the music, the perfume, and the detonator under the pillow were just the work of some prankster, or maybe a side effect of excessive stress. As soon as the money hit his account, he would sell the house immediately and move into a new penthouse with Soraya. He would leave all bad memories here. Money is the most effective cure for all kinds of fears, Theron thought. He picked Soraya up in the lobby of her apartment. The woman was stunning in a formal, understated outfit that still highlighted her curves, posing as Theron's personal assistant. They didn't talk much in the car. There was palpable tension in the air, a hangover from the phone argument the night before. However, the shine of the promise of millions of dollars made them agree to a temporary truce. Soraya grabbed Theron's arm as they entered the skyscraper where the insurance company headquarters was located. The building was imposing, with polished marble floors and people walking with quick, confident steps. Theron felt like he was part of that elite again, the class of winners who could do anything and get away with it. They were received very politely by the VIP receptionist and led directly to an executive conference room on the top floor. The room was very spacious, dominated by a long, shiny mahogany table and comfortable leather chairs. A glass wall on one side of the room offered a breathtaking panorama of the city. Inside the room, 3 men in suits were already waiting, introducing themselves as the claims director, the head of legal, and the company notary. They greeted Theron with compassionate faces, expressing once again their condolences for the tragedy his wife had suffered. Theron put on his best face of sorrow, nodding weakly and saying thank you with a trembling, fake voice. The meeting began with formality.